Rad. I'm Jess Ivins. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I am a user experience designer, which in a nutshell means that I make websites easy to use for the people who need to use them. I work for HappyCog, which is an agency with an office here in Center City at 13th and Sansom. I do want to take a minute to thank the organizers of Rooney, Taney, and Webster for making this happen. Thank you so much. And thank you to Buchanan, Ingersoll, and Rooney, PC for hosting us, letting us use their space and feeding us. Big thank you. So thanks again for coming out. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I'm always really excited to share it. This talk was actually accepted to South by Southwest, so I'll be giving this talk in Austin at South by Southwest in March, which I'm really stoked about. So if you guys have any feedback for me, I think Kristen usually hands out a feedback form. Anything, the good, the bad, the ugly, any constructive criticism would be highly appreciated. You can even share anything during Q&A or contact me later, email me later, or come up to me afterwards. I would really appreciate it. And we'll have time for general questions or feedback and stuff. There's also a hashtag here. If you're a Twitterer, if you want to tweet anything, I encourage you to do so. You can use a hashtag if you want to share any thoughts on Twitter. And I guess that's about it. We can get started. So I always like to start with this. All right, come on, remote. Go. Oh, no, we weren't supposed to see that yet. Okay. All right, I like to start with this. I think most of you are probably familiar with this product. This is the iPad. It was announced about 2 years ago in January 2010. And since then, we've gone from the iPad 1 to the iPad 2. So I'm sure you've heard a bit about this product. So there's the iPad, and then there's this product. And I love jumping, I love this transition. I just love to see people's reactions. Usually there are more men in the room, and the color drains from their face, and then it will drain from your face. But this actually isn't, exactly what you think it is. It's an actual case for your iPad. It's called the iMaxi, and you can get it on Etsy for about $25. So I'm seeing I'm hearing some laughs. I'm seeing some funny faces. Obviously this is kind of funny, but why is it funny? What's the joke? Anyone know? Yeah, yep, that's exactly what it is, because when the iPad was announced, when it was first announced, this innovative, revolutionary product, Apple announces it almost exactly 2 years ago. People aren't talking about the product, they're making pad and tampon jokes, because most women associated this name with pads and tampons, and you get all these jokes kind of flying around immediately online. My favorite one is the lower left-hand corner for when data flow is heavy. So it must have been kind of embarrassing, right? Here you have Apple, the leader in technology, announcing this revolutionary new product, and people are making pad and tampon jokes about it. And it's interesting because people didn't take it for a lot of reasons. There was a lot of skepticism about the iPad when it was announced, and people didn't really take it seriously because of this. And Steve Jobs, rest in peace, he had something to say about this. He said, "You forget, but they made fun of the name iPod too. And what really matters is the product and whether or not it works for people." That's not verbatim, but that's pretty much, what he said. And he was right, because, nobody really thinks about pads and tampons anymore when it comes to the iPad. It was a flash in the pan. But it's an interesting phenomenon for me. I don't know if Apple really anticipated this. I don't know if they knew about it and they just didn't care, or they knew it would be a flash in the pan, if they were totally, shocked by it. I don't know, but there seemed to be some sort of disconnect there with our audience. And to me, it just really rang true that, nobody really asked a woman about the new iPad, at least from my perspective. So this is an example of a product that didn't end so well. Does anybody remember using the site Della? Visiting the site Della? Well, it's not surprising because the site was live for less than 2 weeks. It was Dell's microsite, and the point of the microsite was a campaign. It was marketing their mini netbook to women. And some of the content on the site, here's a quote. It says, "Use your mini to track calories, carbs, and protein feeds." And then there were tech tips. The tech tips consisted of how to find recipes online. So those were tech tips. And I see a lot of shaking heads and whatnot. So some people might not think this was that big of a deal, but they got a lot of heat for this. And the problem was that they took the classic shrink it and pick it reflex, where they decided they were going to market something for women, or design something for women, and they were just going to make it pink and dumb it down, and then it was going to work, and then, it was going to equal all this profit. But it was unfortunate because, they made these decisions based on assumptions and stereotypes, and there was nothing useful about this website at all. It didn't communicate anything meaningful about the product. When you're on the market for a laptop, there are things that you want to know. You want to know, what kind of software can I put on it, and they're playing my music, and none of this information was really provided by the website. The design also alienated men for no reason, because it's a laptop. There's really no reason to design a laptop for a specific gender, not that I can think of. So men were automatically alienated away from this product for no reason. And Dell, they try to play nice. They try to respond to criticism online. They try to respond to the forums and say, thank you for your feedback. We're going to take this into account. And there was just so much explosion online and so much vitriol about this that they just took the site down and kind of swept it under the carpet and tried to pretend it never happened after 10 days. It was very unfortunate. But this is very common. This Della is not alone. I could probably spend another hour just showing you example after example, going back decades, about how this has happened. And we keep making the same mistake. This doesn't always happen when it comes to women. Dr. Pepper 10 was released in the market just this past October. I don't know if any of you folks came across this. But Dr. Pepper released this type of soda. Has 10 manly calories in it. And the idea was that they wanted to market a diet drink to men, but they found that men were turned off by the idea of diet drinks because they associated diet drinks with women and diet drinks weren't manly enough and all this stuff. So Dr. Pepper came out with this campaign where, as part of the campaign, they even had a Facebook page that was for men only. So if your profile, if you indicated that you were a woman on your profile, you could not get to this Facebook page. And I could not see the Facebook page, obviously, because I'm listed as a woman on my profile. But some of the content that I read about was just amazing. There was a shooting gallery where you could go in and shoot, high heels and lipstick, and you could take a man quiz, and they would ask you questions about like fishing and hunting. So we're seeing the same thing. It's just on the opposite side now. You're seeing the men being reduced to these ridiculous stereotypes that really, don't really hold true. At least not for every man, and not every aspect of men's lives involved with this kind of stuff. Dr. Pepper 10 even had a commercial, which I'll share with you. It's kind of interesting.
Hey, ladies. Enjoying the film? Of course not. Because this is our movie! And Dr. Pepper 10 is our soda. It's only 10 manly calories, but with all 23 flavors of Dr. Pepper. It's what guys want, like this. Catchphrase. So you can keep the romantic comedies and lady drinks. We're good. Dr. Pepper 10, it's not for women!
It's like, I love how, at the very end of the commercial, they're like, it's not for women! They have to, make that absolutely clear. So it's just, they resorted to these extremes, and there was certainly some negative reaction, to this commercial, because it's just kind of silly, and it's reducing people to stereotypes that don't really define real people. Also, this is another really funny example, the last example I'm going to show before we move on. But this is an actual product. How many of you here like to drink tea? Drink your tea? Oh, wow, so a lot of you. I love tea. I drink it all the time. I'm really into it. But apparently it's a very feminine thing that men are afraid to do, according to this company. So they sell a tea bag that you can get for your tea to make sure that you feel very masculine, while you're steeping your tea. This is real. This is not a joke. You can't make this up. It's funny, my boyfriend drinks tea sometimes, and I showed this to him, and he's like, this is asinine, is this are they for real? I'm like, if I want tea, I'm just going to get a tea bag out of the cabinet and get tea, so, very funny. We're seeing a lot of extremes here, and again, this is not unusual, because when we design with gender in mind, our instinct is to resort to these extremes, but for the most part, they're not effective, and there are so many strategic ways that we can really reach our audiences when gender does matter. So we're going to cover a lot of things today. There's going to be an emphasis on web design because I'm a web designer. A lot of you are also in web and technology, so that's a good fit, but we're also going to talk about other aspects of design as well. We're not going to talk about designing for girls. I got a lot of questions about designing for young girls and stuff. Usually during Q&A, but it's just kind of outside of the scope, so we're just going to focus on adult women for the purpose of this talk. So I did some research. I wanted to know, I knew in my heart of hearts that it was important not to market to women, in a stereotypical way, or men for that matter, but I wanted to really know, why it was important. So I did some research and I found some really compelling statistics. And first and foremost, I found, I read this in many places, that women make or influence 80% of consumer purchases in this country. So if they're not making purchases, they have quite a bit of clout, quite a bit of influence on how other people in their lives are spending their money. So this is really incredible. 80% of all consumer purchases in the United States are made or influenced by women. I mean, that's insane. So this really speaks volumes to how important it is that we understand women. So women are also spending a lot of money online. They're spending almost 60% of e-commerce dollars. So when things are purchased online, women are also spending the majority of money. So for us web designers, this is also something that we need to pay attention to. So women, obviously, they don't just buy for themselves based on that first statistic, making or influencing 80% of purchases. They're influencing other people's purchases, but they're also buying on behalf of other people. And it's not just in obvious ways, like, mothers buying stuff for their kids. It's, people buying things on behalf of their neighbors. Oh, I picked this up for you because I thought you'd really like it, or a coworker, or something like that. They're very empathetic and communal in our culture. So it's another aspect that's really fascinating. And globally, women spend more time using social media than men do. So they're influencing a lot of people's opinions about things. They're sharing a lot of things online. And it's not just products, it's just general influence. So it's really amazing, how much clout and influence that women have in our culture. So I did some research to see who else was talking about women, maybe looking to see outside of the design or the web design sphere to see what we can learn. And I found that marketers definitely know that women are very empowered when it comes to money, and marketers are working really hard to understand women. So there's a lot that we can learn from marketers. In industrial design, there's a group of designers called the Femden. They're based in New York, and they design products like everything from toasters to cookware to all sorts of stuff. And they specialize in designing products for women. And they do a lot of research, and they design really effective and useful products. They don't trick it and pink it. They're really, really good at what they do, and there's a lot that we can learn from them, and I'll be referencing them quite a bit throughout the presentation. In my field, user experience, UX stands for user experience, there are people talking about it, so you might see an interview here, or you might read an article there. So there's a lot of piecemeal information that we can kind of cull together and bring into our practice as designers to make things better for women or men. So I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts of how to design for women. First off, beware of myths, stereotypes, and assumptions. This sounds really obvious, but there are so many accepted norms that we have in our culture about what women want or what men want. And it's really easy to fall into that trap of making those assumptions. So, which one of these products do you think was designed for a woman? Most people would probably say the one on the left. Yeah, it was a trick question, but somebody said both. That's absolutely correct. They were both designed for women. Obviously, the one on the left, at some point somebody made the decision that, okay, we're going to make a tool set, we want women to buy it, so we're going to make it pink. And then we're going to put it on the shelf, and they're all going to flock to Home Depot and buy it. But if you look at the one on the left, really, all that was done was they took a flimsy tool set, and they made it pink. And that's really all. That's the end of the story. The one on the right, however, is a power drill designed for women. And that power drill is very useful because it is lighter in weight, because women have less upper body strength, so women won't fatigue as easily when they're using it. It's also smaller, and it's easier to grip. Women have smaller hands than men do. So it's a very good drill. I've read good reviews of it online. I don't own a drill. My boyfriend does. I don't. But if I were ever to buy one for myself, I'd probably buy that drill. And it's just profound. And when you look at these two products, they were both designed for the same audience. But the one on the right is just so much more strategically and effectively designed than the one on the left. And big box retailers know this. More and more women are becoming the leaders, I guess, in home repair. More and more women are taking charge of home repair products or projects. Single women and even women in committed relationships, women who are married or have a male partner. They're taking the lead, they're making the decisions, they're actually starting to get down and dirty, even hanging drywall, not just painting and spackling. So, designing things that are easy for women to use in realistic ways is always very important. And it's really important to keep that in mind because our instinct, again, is to go to the approach of the left. So I thought we could bust a myth or two. I think there's just one actually in this deck, but there are many myths about what women like and what women don't like, what men like and what men don't like. And the first myth is that women aren't in video games. So, I think this myth is becoming less and less true, or less and less in existence, I guess. More and more people are realizing that this is the case. But I'd like you to picture in your mind the classic stereotype of someone who plays a lot of video games. Like, what kind of person are you picturing in your mind? What does this person look like? Teenage boy. Maybe like a guy in his 20s, maybe a guy in his 30s who still lives like in his parents' basement or something. This is what I always pictured after seeing this episode of South Park. How many of you remember this episode of South Park? I remember this. Okay. So only a few of you. So long story short, this is the episode where Cartman becomes obsessed with playing World of Warcraft. And he plays it for days and weeks on end, and he gets like obese and gross, and all this other gross stuff happens because it's South Park, and of course gross stuff happens where it wouldn't be South Park. But they're playing on the stereotype here. This is the archetype of what we classically considered, video gamers to be, like a guy who's probably doesn't get out very much, who doesn't have a lot of friends. There's a lot of complexity to this stereotype. But in reality, depending on what games you're talking about, the majority of people who play these games are women, and that's very, very true when it comes to casual games. About 75% of casual gamers are women. And when I say casual games, I mean games like Angry Birds, Words with Friends, Sudoku, Bejeweled, Tetris, games that are really popular now on mobile phones, like games that you can pick up and play for 3 minutes and then put away. I'm not really talking about the role-playing games like World of Warcraft and stuff. Those are still actually predominantly men and boys. But 75% of casual games, the casual games are just exploding now because of the ubiquity of smartphones. So there are so many women out there playing games, and it's just amazing. Like once you dig and you find out the facts, it's just amazing how it conflicts with our preconceived notions of how things are supposed to be. She blogs about marketing to women, and one of the things she talks about is not stereotyping women. Holly, it's a great blog. I highly recommend it. I try to read it as much as I can. She also co-authored a book called The Soccer Mom Myth. There are several, at least several, if not more, books about marketing to women. This is one of them. And she talks about, this sounds very obvious, but it's also very true. People don't like to be stereotyped. How when you stereotype people, you don't really establish an authentic connection with them. Your messaging doesn't sit with them. It doesn't communicate to them that you really understand them. It communicates to people that you're just reducing them to a stereotype. One of my favorite stereotypes when it comes to women is a meme that was out about a year ago. Did anybody see this on the hairpin? Okay, so a couple of you. Women laughing alone eating salad, where someone actually went out and gathered, all these stock photos. It's like stock photo after stock photo after stock photo of a woman like by herself, laughing and eating salad. And it's just like photo after photo after photo of these like young, thin, beautiful women, eating salad because that's all we do. When we're happy, we eat salad, and that's the only thing we eat. Only women eat salad. Of course, men would never eat salad. Or laugh. So, just like photo after photo, And this lady, probably in the white, is my favorite. She's like on a sidewalk or something. And this lady is like by herself in a field. So, kind of end with her. So it's just. It's so funny, like, how inundated we are with these cliches, and, this applies to everybody, it's not just women, but I just thought I would share this. It's just classic, it's just hysterical, it speaks volumes for itself. So, Holly Buchanan has a kind of tongue-in-cheek test that you can use to compare against your design or your advertisement to see if it's effective for women. And the first question in the test is, do you feature a woman outside of the home? So, it's very true that statistics show that women still do the majority of housework. It's an unequal balance in terms of, household tasks. They're still doing the majority of child rearing and laundry and all that stuff. However, most women work. Most women have interests outside of housework. women are not defined by housework like they were 50, 60 years ago. So the first part, you manage to pass the test if you can feature a woman outside of the home. Second question is, do you feature her in a role of a mother? Not every woman has children, obviously, and women who do have children aren't defined by motherhood. Again, they have jobs, they have interests, they have hobbies, they have friends, they have other things going on. So motherhood is obviously very important to you, and if you have children, it's not what defines you. And the last one, is she not doing good? So if you manage to pass the first two questions, you want to pass the third one again. So not, not still keeping her in some sort of stereotypical role. Holly has this great quote: "You make an emotional connection with a woman when you show you respect her, understand her, and value all of her contributions and roles in society." I think that could be, said for everyone, but I think that's a really powerful statement. Holly also showed an advertisement, which I think was really well done. It's a commercial for Under Armour, sports gear. Under Armour makes everything from sports clothes to shoes to gadgets and all sorts of stuff for working out. And I think it's a really, really effective ad because it doesn't stereotype women. It doesn't. It's not demeaning. There's no pink. There's no shrink. It just shows women in this really empowered light. I think it's really effective. So I'll go ahead and show. I've probably seen that commercial 20 times. And if I'm ever on the fence about whether or not I should go to the gym, I put that commercial on. All right, yeah, I'm gonna go to the gym. All right, I'm ready. But I think it's really effective, really powerful. It's not insulting. It's it makes you want to emulate those women. They're very talented athletes, and it's a really awesome ad. And if more ads targeted towards women were like that, I think it would be a really wonderful thing. So next I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk a little bit about user research. How many of you are, a lot of you work in the web sphere. How many of you are familiar with user research? Either you've seen it or participated with it. So maybe half of you? Okay. So that's good. User research is a technique employed with user experience where you actually ask questions and observe your users and understand their motivations and behaviors so that you can design appropriately for them. Whether you're designing a website, piece of software like this is some sort of scientific software. It looks like college students are using it. I found this picture. I thought it was really cool. I don't know exactly what it's for. I mostly work on websites, but that's not always the case. I could be working on some sort of software tool, and I could be designing software for something that I know absolutely nothing about, but I need to make sure that it's useful and usable for the people using it. So I would conduct user research with students, professors, people like this, to talk to them and get to understand what their needs are, what they need the software to do, so that I can design it appropriately, rather than just making it look cool, which is what a lot of traditional design approaches would tell you to do, just kind of make it look neat. But it needs to be useful and it needs to be usable, or else it's worthless. User research can also reveal pain points in your design. So if you have a product, or if you're redesigning a product that someone else designed, if you conduct user research and you watch how people use the product, you can see where they're struggling with it. If they're getting frustrated with it. And we've all experienced pain points. Obviously, this has nothing to do with a website, but I found this image and I was just like, wow. that sucks. There's a lot about that sucks. I really wouldn't advocate doing that. But these people had a really, really bad experience at this restaurant that they were at. And so raise your hand if you've ever been infuriated with a website to the point where you were almost this angry, where, just by a show of hands. Okay, so most of you, yeah. And it happens. It's happened with me with like little gadgets that I'm trying to use, or I'm trying to figure out some sort of arcane like can opener, like some fancy can opener that I've never seen before. I'm like, why can't I just figure this out? Why do I have to manual? So there are lots of pain points when it comes to design, and user research can help you identify them and alleviate them. Some user research methods are user interviews, where you actually interview the people that you're designing for. You ask a series of questions and really get to understand what their needs are. Usability testing. This image shows you actually a usability test where there's a facilitator, that woman, and there's a man participant. And she's walking him through the test and having him use a website or a piece of software and asking him to do things with that website or piece of software and seeing where he struggles, where he succeeds. So seeing where any design improvements can be made. I'd like to go through a case study with you. At Happy Cog, we redesigned a local hospital system website. The website isn't live yet; it's launched yet, and it's all been redacted for privacy reasons. But I'm going to share with you some user research that we did with patients, and how that led to the design decisions and recommendations that we made. So just to give you some background information, we know from industry knowledge, anyone who works in healthcare will tell you this stuff, that women play a doctor role in their families. They make a lot of healthcare decisions. They're not just necessarily the ones who tend to stay home with sick kids. They still do a lot more than that. They go to doctor appointments with family members. They get prescriptions. They make appointments. They research symptoms online. There's a lot of people try to self-diagnose online. Like, women are doing a lot of this stuff. So we already knew this as just general knowledge. But we wanted to talk to our users because it's always good to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. General industry research is good, but nothing replaces talking to your actual users or people who represent your actual users, like potential users. So our research method consisted of user interviews with patients and caregivers. We recruited actual users from the hospital's website. So there's a tool called FNO you can use that pops up a little form, and it basically incentivizes the user. It says you get $75 for participating in this research study, and they fill out the form, and if they meet our criteria, we contact them and schedule an interview. We asked them all sorts of questions about how they manage healthcare, how they look for doctors, and all sorts of stuff that really informed the design of the website. So our research findings confirm that in some capacity, all the participants serve as caregivers or health information seekers for friends and family members. And we already knew this about family, but it was really compelling to see how much influence these women had over other people in their lives, not just immediate family. So again, this has been redacted. This is not her real picture. This is not her real name. But this participant, we'll call her Emily. She's 29 years old. She didn't have any children, but she was doing all sorts of things on behalf of her boyfriend and her sister, both of whom were adults. And I just found this to be really, really fascinating. I love what I do, and I love user research, and I love learning how other people do things. It's kind of like, it's a little bit of anthropology in there. And she was telling me how she orders prescriptions for her boyfriend and her sister. She books their appointments. She researches their symptoms, when they're not feeling well, or her sister had dietary needs, like special dietary needs. So she was always conducting research on behalf of her sister. So I said to her, in the most diplomatic way possible, I said, does she have special needs? Is she not able to do this for herself? And she just laughed. She just said, oh no, I'm an enabler. So it was kind of a funny reaction. She was taking on a very matriarchal role, even though she wasn't a mother, and even though the people in her lives that she was doing this for were perfectly able to do it for themselves. It was very, very fascinating, again, like how much influence and clout that women have when it comes to their loved ones and the people that are close to them. Another participant, again, had no children. She was retired, but she did a lot of the same thing for her friends, and her friends were her age, so she was in a very different kind of life stage. But again, she was Googling symptoms for them. She was helping them research doctors if they were referred to a specialist. She would Google that specialist and look up, try to find patient reviews to see if that specialist got good reviews and bad reviews. We talked to her about looking for a doctor and the things that she looks for in a doctor. We asked all the participants this. This person was less concerned with credentials and, degrees and all that stuff. And she wanted to know about the doctor's personality. Like, is this the kind of doctor who's going to be empathetic? Is this doctor going to sit and listen to me? What's the doctor's bedside manner like? Are they going to rush me out of the room? Are they going to rush my friend out of the room? And these were the things that were really important to her. The last participant we'll go over, we'll call her Joan. She was in her early 40s. She was married with 3 young children. She lived out in the suburbs, somewhere near the Limerick area. She manages healthcare information for her children and her husband, which is not surprising. But it was really fascinating to me that she spent so much time researching diabetes because her 5-year-old nephew had diabetes. And this wasn't even her son. But he was close in age to her children, so he would spend some time over the house every now and then. And she said to me, it's really important that I understand diabetes and that I want my sister to understand it so she can take better care of him. She said, I want my kids to understand it because they can't just be giving him a Snickers bar whatever you put over it. My kids need to be informed, but I really need to be informed about this. She wasn't just informing herself. She would send articles to her sister. She would share, she would see a news report, health news report on CNN, and send it to her sister. Or she would even mail newspaper clippings to her mom, which was the little boy's grandmother. And she would send little boy's grandmother newspaper clippings about diabetes and everything. I thought that was just really fascinating. And when she was looking for doctors, she was one of the people who wanted to know more about their credentials. So she wanted to see how old the person was, because when she said, when I see a specialist, I want to know they're older because I want to know if they're established and experienced. I want to see where they went to school. So it was just really fascinating to see all the different criteria and perspectives that all these people had. But we saw a lot of commonality, a lot of trends, and how they were doing so many things for so many other people who weren't even in their immediate family.
So I just wanted to say, you mentioned that these women were acting as doctors, but to me, they actually sound like they're acting as caregivers.
Yeah.
And there's a big distinction in medicine between doctoring and caregiving.
That's a good point.
Nursing is traditionally not seen as a science-based profession, but a truly caregiving one.
Yeah.
So just the point for feedback.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely not like I'm thinking the stereotype of Dr. Mom, it was Robitussin or something from living with Dr. Mom. That's
WebMD. There's no WebRN out there, is there?
Mm-hmm.
There's no WebRN out there yet. Nurses are the ones that generally interact with patients most of the time and provide the caregiving information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Good point. So some of our recommendations to the client based on these user research findings were, we said it's really important to facilitate the sharing of information. So make sure that your design makes it easy to share things on Facebook, to share things via email. And there was a lot that we learned. I didn't go into too much detail about this, but we asked a lot of questions about how people look for doctors. So we had to make sure that people were able to find doctors quickly and easily. We needed, you want to make sure that there's adequate information on your doctor's profile and not just contact information. You want to give the doctor a personality. You want to, maybe a personal statement from the doctor or patient testimonials. Some way to make this doctor human and humanize this doctor so that people who are, getting ready for an appointment and trying to get a sense of who this doctor is can really get an understanding of how this doctor works and relates to his or her patients. So we talked a bit about user research. Another thing you can do is employ and listen to female designers. The majority of designers and developers out there are still male, as most of you probably know. And not that there's certainly anything wrong with men. I have no problem with men whatsoever. But there's a disconnect there. So if you're designing for a group of people and you are not that group of people, inherently, there's a gap there. You're less likely to be able to empathize with those people. So employing and listening to female designers is crucial. It's not always possible, but when you can, it can certainly help. Sharon Bardzell is a professor at Indiana University. I'm probably butchering her name because I've never met her and I don't know how to pronounce her name. But she has this great quote, I read it in an article. She talks about employing and listening to female designers, talking about how it's predominantly a man's world. But if you bring in more female designers who understand and appreciate women's experiences, you can narrow the gap between the design team and the target user group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about visible design versus transparent design. These are two different design approaches that you can take when you are designing for a specific gender. Don't Think Pink is a book about marketing to women that I read about a year ago, and it talks about visible marketing versus transparent marketing. But we can take these concepts and easily apply them to design. The first approach is visible design, and this is where you clearly direct your design towards one particular gender. You can brand it as a women's product or a men's product. You want to use it only when you're absolutely sure that you're not going to alienate the other gender, and you're absolutely sure that the other gender is not part of your target audience. So a great example of visible design is the Gillette razor, or the Venus razor, excuse me. This is made by Gillette. They really did their homework. It came out about 10 years ago, and it actually won an award from IDSA for one of the best designs of the decade in 2010. And before this came out, really, this was pretty revolutionary because most razors were just either men's razors or cheap, just, kind of generic razors, disposable razors. And, they weren't really customized for women's needs. But these were specially designed for women. Gillette really did a lot of research. They talked to a lot of women. As creepy as this sounds, they even went as far as to observe women shaving in the shower. I don't know if I could volunteer for that, but apparently somebody did. And as a result, they were able to design a really effective product. It's a product that when you use it, it adjusts to the contours of your legs and your body. It's easy to grip. It's so you don't drop it when it's wet in the shower. It won't slip out of your hands. So it's less likely to slip out of your hands. And it wouldn't be as comfortable or useful for men because the vast majority of men, when they shave their faces and their neck, and the vast majority of women shave their legs and their private areas. So those are two very, very different activities. You're going to be holding it in a different way. You're going to be holding it at a different angle. The parts of your body that you're shaving are very differently shaped. So it's two very different experiences that warrant different designs. Now I have to say, how many women in here prefer men's razors? Only like 3 of you? Wow.
My last boyfriend actually preferred my Venus.
That's
I had to
And
buy
so
one
does my
for my
cousin.
boyfriend because he kept stealing mine.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So did my cousin.
My boyfriend hates him.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's really fascinating. I've never heard that. I've heard a lot of women say, like, when I get to this point, they're like, oh, well, I like men's razors. Fair enough. I can't really argue with that. I've never tried men's razors, but I actually use this product, and I'm really happy with it.
Like, how many of us do use that product? Because I swear by it.
Oh my God.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the penis is
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah. So that's great. Yeah. Oh, wow. Enough said. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a really effective product. It's sold very well. It's a very, very good design, very successful design. So that was a great example of visible design. And just to go back to this, this package design, this is actually an older one. I think they've come out with I think they've kind of branched off and you can get specialized Venuses now and stuff, but I just have the basic one. But this is, it's very feminine. It's called a Venus. It's a very feminine package design, but really, in my opinion, maybe people would disagree with me. I think that's fine because it's targeted for women. It's not intended to be used by men. If it were intended for both genders, I think that would be a problem. But, this package design said this is clearly for women. It was designed, it was intended for women to use it. So I don't see any problem, making it feminine with this particular product in this context. So transparent design is different from visible design. With this approach, you don't explicitly label something or brand something for women or for men. But you want to meet the needs of your target audience without really touting that it's for your target audience. And at the end of the day, it usually works well for everyone. Femden, that group of industrial designers I mentioned earlier, most of the approaches they take are transparent design. They actually redesigned scrubs. And before I show you what their design is, I'll just go into some background about the problems with traditional scrubs. The problem was that the design really didn't work for the intended audience. 75% of hospital workers are women. And throughout healthcare, the majority of people in healthcare are women. There are actually more women surpassing men in medical school these days. There are just a lot of women who go into healthcare, and a lot of women who wear scrubs. But unfortunately, the scrubs were designed for a man who was 6 feet tall. And it had, You know, it was just really tight in the hips. The legs were way too long. And I read about, you know, FemDev shared a lot of their research, and they talked to a lot of people who would, you know, the pant legs would be too long and would gather dirt, and you'd walk into work and you'd be dragging dirt into a sterile environment, which was, you know, not cool. And also the unprofessional gaping V-neck was a big problem. And I thought this was a kind of a really compelling quote. You know, one of the researchers at FemDev said, you know, a doctor told her that there wasn't a woman at the hospital whose boobs he hadn't seen. And I mean, I can't imagine like being at work and everyone being able to see my cleavage when I bend over. I mean, it's just like, it's just not insane. So FemDev came along and they redesigned the scrubs. And they called their scrubs indoor scrubs. And these scrubs were designed, they were designed particularly for women, but they were designed to be adjustable for pretty much so anyone could wear them. I think when you bought them, they were sized for a woman, so they were probably sized for someone like my height, because I'm 5'3", which is pretty average. But you could actually adjust the straps and the legs and everything if you were 6'3", and it would still fit you. They had angled pockets for holding supplies. It's another problem with traditional scrubs is that the pockets just didn't work for what they needed to put inside of them. Has a rounded collar, so no gaping necklines, so you can bend over and not show everyone your cleavage. I think this is like a close-up of the leg. Yeah, there's like buttons down there so you can adjust the height. So it's intended for women, and it works really well for women, but it also works for men. And it's not branded as a women's product. They don't tout it as something, hey, women, this is really going to work well for you. It just works well for them. So it doesn't alienate men. Oops. So it doesn't alienate men who could easily use the product as well. So I like to use ESPN as another example of transparent design. I don't think it's the best example out there. I think a lot of people are critical of the ESPN brand, and they say it could be more inclusive to women. But ESPN is an example of transparent design for men, because it's not really, even though it's a very masculine brand, to me it's always just seemed very masculine. It's not touted as the men's sports network. It's not really branded as something for men. And ESPN, they're smart enough to know that a significant number of their viewers are women. And in 2009, over 4 million women watched NFL programming on ESPN. So 4 million is certainly not a number that you want to ignore, even though the majority of your viewers are men. So it is designed for men, but it works for both genders. But again, I say take it with a grain of salt, because a lot of people are critical of the brand, and they say it could be more inclusive. But it is not branded as something for men. It is not the men's sports network. It is not, the blog. They have all sorts of blogs and commentary, and they don't lean in with like a man's take on, this season of NFL. It could be much, much more explicitly branded for men, but it is not. So next up, in some cases, men and women might like things for different reasons. This is kind of an edge case, but I like to show this example because I think it's really interesting. The Mini Cooper was actually designed for men and women, but certain aspects of the design appeal to different genders. Women tend to like it for the aesthetics, and they tend to like it because it's fun to drive. And men like it because it is a sports car. Its performance and handling is very much that of a sports car. So it tends to appeal to different genders for different reasons. Now, not everyone falls into this mold, obviously. Like, some men might not like it, some women might not like the way it looks, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, there aren't many cars out there that I think appeal to both men and women. And I think there are a lot of men and women who own a Mini, and they're really passionate about it, and they're really happy with it. I know, personally, I know several men and several women who own Minis, and they all really like the car. So, women have a low tolerance for bad design. This probably sounds really, really sexist, because it probably sounds like I'm implying that women are stupid. But that's not the case at all, and it's really interesting that research has established that women just have much less tolerance for design. And this study in particular was conducted in the 80s or 90s by Yale, and they took a group of men and they took a group of women, and they asked them to program a VCR based on these written instructions. And they found that 68% of the men were successful, but only 16% of the women were successful. So it's a huge gap, right? This is like a drastic difference. And you have to wonder, we know that gender has nothing to do with intelligence, really. So, you know, why is this the case? Like, why are women so intolerant of bad design? And there are a few theories out there. And one of them being that, you know, according to the FemDev, I've heard other people say this too. I've heard Genevieve Bell is a researcher at Intel, and she said something very similar. You know, they just talk about how women usually don't have the same desire to conquer a product that men do. So if women encounter a product or a website or whatever it is that's not easy to learn, that's not easy to use, they're much more likely to just give up on it and say the hell with it, I'm not going to bother with this, or I'm going to use a competitor who's much easier to learn and use. And men are more likely to just sit down and figure the damn thing out if they take on the challenge. So it's kind of interesting. Women are also, you know, in our culture, like I said, they're very busy. They have a lot, you know, many women work, and on top of that, they have a lot of things that they need to get done, a lot of things that they're responsible for. So another theory is that, you know, they just don't have the time or energy to figure things out. You know, they're just not going to bother to learn how to use your bad design, and they're going to either just give up on it and move on to something else. So there are some design preferences based on gender, aesthetic preferences based on gender, and these have been shown through research. I share these like very begrudgingly because I'll tell you to take them with a grain of salt, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But I read this book. It's very dry. It's really expensive. It was like $100, and I kept reading like, all right, gotta read this book if you're really interested in this topic. And finally, I'm like, I'm such a cheapskate. Okay, so I like read the book. It was interesting, but it's just very dry. It's Gloria Moss is a British researcher, but she's dedicated her life to researching this topic, like the difference. You know, when it comes to gender, the difference in perspectives, I guess, and aesthetic preferences with design and marketing differences. So Gloria, you know, conducted lots and lots of research, and she found that when it comes to aesthetics, these are women's preferences. They prefer rounded shapes and lines, bright colors, a lot of detail and patterns, unconventional typography, so maybe like scripted fonts. I know it sounds so tacky. Every designer in the room probably just died when I said that. But women are much more perceptive to unconventional typography. They like to see depictions of other women in designs. Excuse me, and they like originality. She found that men basically prefer the opposite. Clean and straight lines, neutral colors instead of bright colors, simplicity, conventional typography, similar to like Times New Roman, Arial kind of stuff. They like to see depictions of men, and they like conventionality over originality. So if you put these side by side, it's polar opposites when it comes to aesthetic preferences. You know, women like certain things and men like certain other things, and this is established, you know, through research. Gloria also found that most people tend to prefer designs created by people of their own gender. And she conducted research where, you know, she took groups of men and groups of women and asked them a series of questions about their preferences about certain designs. And she found that they tended to prefer designs from people of the same gender, even when they didn't know the gender of the designer. It's kind of an interesting little finding there. Now, I say take this with a grain of salt for a couple of reasons. This is a screenshot of Groupon. How many of you are members of Groupon? Or you're subscribed? Okay, so a lot of you, almost all of you. Group buying sites. Groupon is, you know, probably still the biggest. It was certainly the first biggest. Group buying sites tend to appeal more to women than men. They have more female members than male members, which, based on everything that we just talked about, makes sense because women, you know, are the ones spending a lot of money. But, you know, the majority of their users are women, but, you know, there's really nothing about this design that screams feminine design to me. Like, I see some bright colors, I see some rounded shapes, there's a rounded buy button, but I also see a lot of straight lines, there's a lot of like boxes with a few rounded corners. The logo is very to me, and the really heavy, all caps, you know, capital fonts in the logo. It feels like kind of heavy and like more masculine to me. So there's, you know, I'm seeing some bright colors here, but this doesn't scream feminine design to me. And I can show you many examples of this, where, you know, products or websites that are just that are used primarily by women that just don't seem very feminine to me, or at least they don't seem to embody the aesthetic preferences that Gloria established. It's also important to remember that visual design is only a part of good design. You know, research has shown that if people will think that your website's better and easier to use, if it's aesthetically pleasing. However, aesthetics won't save you. So if your websites, if they can't complete the task that they came to your website to do, your website can be the most beautiful website on the planet, and it still has failed at serving its purpose. So visual design is only part of good design. So again, I would say take all that with a grain of salt. So next up are a few guidelines for designing for women, courtesy of the Benben. So the first thing they say is emphasizing benefits over features or specs. They talk about, when you're trying to craft a story around how your product is going to benefit somebody, and when you're targeting women, you want to tell her how it's going to make her life better, what it's going to do for her, rather than talking about the specs or the technical details of the product. So she likely doesn't care about all this stuff like RAM and processing speed and resolution and horsepower. And again, it's not because women are stupid. I'm not trying to sound sexist that they don't understand this stuff. They just don't care. Like what they want to know is, how is this thing going to help them? What is this going to do for them? Okay, if you're trying to sell me an iPad, I don't really care. I'm just kind of role playing here. But I don't care how many gigabytes it has. I probably don't even really understand quite what that means. I don't care what the actual resolution is. I want to know what kind of apps can I put on it? What can those apps do for me? Can I check my email on it? Can I put photos on it? How can I actually use it? What can it do for me? How can it make my life better? And not only does she want to know these things about herself, again, she always has other people in mind. So you really want to craft a story around not only how this is going to help her, but how this could help other people in her life. And how, she could share this wonderful product or this wonderful website with other people in her life who she thinks might benefit from it. A great example of a product where you can do this is the Wii, because just about anybody, unless they have a physical disability or if it's like a baby or someone who's very, very elderly, pretty much anyone can play Wii. My brother's wife actually has a really rare form of cerebral palsy, and she's not in a wheelchair or anything, but her mobility is somewhat limited, but she can play Wii bowling, and she's actually really good at it. So it's just, it speaks volumes as to, how many people can play Wii and enjoy Wii, and it's just an example of a product where you can really crack that story. And, the Wii's been around for a while, so it's like an older example. But it's just so easy to tell this story around the Wii. If you're trying to sell it to somebody, if you're trying to sell it to a male, very likely, you might want to talk more of tech specs, maybe. But for a woman, you want to talk about the experience and how, all the kids in her family can use it, her in-laws can use it when they come over, and the other kids in the neighborhood can play it. So just a great example of, how you can sell her on features and benefits rather than specs. So the next thing on the list is considering the full experience. So women tend to pay attention to every aspect of your brand. So if you have a website, and you have TV ads, and you have a retail store, and you have all these other aspects of your brand, newspaper ads, whatever it is, women are really involved with every aspect of your brand, so it's really important to keep it in mind when it comes to every aspect of your brand. And Sony Style is an example of a company that did just that. They have stores that are kind of like the Apple Store, only they sell Sony products. And they designed these retail stores with women in mind. They made the aisles really wide to accommodate for strollers and people with children. They have a little customer service desk right when you walk in with friendly people who are willing to answer your questions and show you around. They also show products in context. So it's interesting, I haven't gone to Best Buy in a long time, so it might be different now, but I compare this to Best Buy, and Best Buy is basically just a row of TVs with little spec cards next to them, and you just walk around and look at every TV, and you just look at the price and you look at the specs, and if you understand what the specs are, great. If you don't, you're probably just trying to figure out what the difference is, and why is this one $200 more than that one. But with this store layout, you can actually, experience the product. You can sit down in front of the TV at a comparable distance of probably where your couch would be, and you can experience the product, and you can start to visualize how it would fit into your own space. And this really resonates with women. It really helps them understand, how the product's going to fit into their space. When my kid crawls around it, is he going to hit his head on it, kind of a thing. She can really kind of get a feel for what it's like to own this product. And this was intentional. Now, if you look, there are those little spec cards with prices and everything. So if you want to see the tech specs, they are there. But there's just a lot more thought that went into this design. So next up is identifying the spot on the spectrum. So depending on what women are doing, they might want to feel really feminine in the activity in which they are engaged. So if you're designing nice clothes or personal care products, probably with keeping in mind the feminine end of the spectrum is a good thing. But if you look at the other end of the spectrum, there's that hand drill again. You know, when she's doing stuff at home, I don't think she really cares about being sparkly and you know, looking nice and wearing high heels, you know, because she's not really engaged in a feminine activity. That's also a hiking boot, a women's hiking boot. It's not pink, you know, there's really nothing feminine about it, because when you're hiking, you don't necessarily want to feel feminine, you want to feel secure and sturdy, and you want to, you know, you just want something to be appropriate for the activity that you're engaged in. So, again, a laptop, you know, just because someone's a woman doesn't mean they need a pink laptop. It's a laptop. You know, there's really nothing feminine or masculine about using a computer. So I think the spectrum is kind of puts things into perspective, depending on your product. You know, it might need a certain touch of femininity or masculinity, or it might not. So I want to go through 2 success stories. I haven't worked on these products, so they're not like case studies that I've engaged in, but these are just a couple examples that I think design really well. They recognize gender and how it impacts design challenges, and they really design against it in a smart way. The first is a personal finance site. There are actually 2 personal finance sites that I'll show you. But they both tackle this problem equally well. And there are actually personal financial challenges that women face that men tend to not face so often. So the first one being, just to give you some context, women tend to live longer than men. So saving for retirement is important for everyone, but it's especially important for women because they're likely to outlive their spouses. So they're likely to, you know, be more at risk to not have enough money when they're older and unable to work. They earn less than men. I'm sure you've seen news reports about how like women are surpassing men, and you know, women are starting to make more money than men. And in some ways, that's true, especially professional women, you know, with college degrees. That is starting to happen in some aspects. But across the board, you know, especially when it comes to working class women, women are still earning 77% of what men earn overall. So they're not bringing home as much money in their paychecks. So women are more likely to leave the workforce when they have to care for a child or a sick relative. So if mother or grandmother gets sick and needs someone to stay home with her or be with her when she has to go on hospice or whatever it is, if there's a family member that has to do that, it's more likely to be a woman than a man. And obviously when you're not working, you're not bringing home a paycheck, but you're also not contributing to Social Security, and you're not contributing to a 401k or another savings plan. So again, you're facing financial risks for later in life. Women are less likely to negotiate salary. I read a lot about this, and I was just like, I just thought back to when I was getting out of college, and I was like, damn, you know, why didn't I play more hardball? But it's very true. You know, plenty of research really shows that, you know, women are much less likely to negotiate salary, and when they do negotiate, they don't play hardball. So that's one of many factors contributing to the fact that we don't make as much money as men. More women than men now are graduating from college. That means more women than men are graduating with this crazy college debt that people are graduating with these days. So consider all of this, and then consider, you know, everything we talked about, how women are making all these financial decisions and they're spending the money, and so it's just amazing. There's such a need for financial education for people who are spending all the money and making all the financial decisions. So in comes these 2 websites, LearnVest and DailyWorth. I subscribe to both. They're both great. I kind of prefer DailyWorth a little bit more than LearnVest. I just like their writing style. It's very empowering and they're very to the point. But they're both financial education websites for women. You can sign up and subscribe and get daily alerts, and there's little boot camps that you can go through and whatnot. But they really understand these different financial needs that women face, and they really design for them, and they write their content based on those needs. Some examples of the topics they cover are general things like saving for retirement, and then more specific things like salary negotiation, Dealing with money toxic friends, sort of the social aspect and the social influence that your friends can have on you, and or people in your life can have on you to encourage you to spend money in ways that necessarily aren't so wise. And even, this is a really specific example, but I found this really interesting, the dirty secrets of outlet shopping, how outlet stores are really geared towards women, but you're not necessarily getting the bargains that you think you are. Because outlet stores began as, overstock places where retailers had overstock, so they'd send them to the outlet stores, but now they're actually making clothing intended for outlet stores, but they're doing it in a really cheap way, so that the clothing that you're buying, you're spending less on it, but it's actually really cheap to make. So you're not really saving any money because it's less likely to, withstand the dryer and the washer, and it's less likely to last for the whole season. So that's the first example, Daily Worth and LearnVest. LearnVest and Daily Worth for financial education. The second example involves online dating. So just to give you some context, there's a different dynamic and different behaviors when it comes to online dating based on your gender. So men and women behave very differently, and men tend to be very aggressive. This is not the case all the time, but generally speaking, with most dating sites, this is how it works. Men are really aggressive, and they sign up and they decide that they're going to put themselves out there and contact every woman that they're remotely interested in. So they'll start looking at women's profiles and sending these women links, which are kind of like Facebook posts or emails or messages. And they're doing this a lot. So they're contacting a lot of women. And you flip the coin, and you're seeing that women are getting really overwhelmed by all this. And this happened to me. I haven't dated in a while. I've been with my boyfriend for almost 6 years now. But we met online, and this is exactly what I went through. How, women get overwhelmed by all these messages. They get contacted by all sorts of men. And it's some of the men you're interested in, some of the men you're not. And there's just some of the men are old enough to be your father, and that's not ageist, but it's just that wasn't really what I was looking for. And I was just so overwhelmed. And a lot of women go through this, and they don't know where to start. It's just very overwhelming to spend a few hours sitting in your inbox reading through all these messages, trying to figure out who it is that you want to go on a date with, or who it is that you want to respond to, let alone want to date with. So, at the end of the day, everyone's frustrated. By the way, if you do an image search for the word frustrated, you get all these pictures of people yelling at their computers. It's kind of fun. So, I couldn't read this. So men aren't hearing anything back because the women are so overwhelmed, and the women are getting frustrated because they're getting overwhelmed. So nobody's really happy with this system. So the classic, online dating system, in the classic way that it was designed, just really wasn't working based on user behavior. So along came a site called Perway. It was designed differently. It was just designed really, really well against these user behaviors. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the best example of visible design, because it kind of looks like it almost kind of looks like she's sitting next to them, or sitting next to him, but they're outside, and they're he's in the wilderness with a fishing pole, and she's sitting next to him looking at a picture of him. It's kind of bizarre. But I think, in terms of designing against user behavior, it works really well, because what it does is it allows both men and women to sign up. But over half of Perway's members are men. But only women can browse men's profiles, and only women can initiate contact, but men can't browse women's profiles or initiate contact. So it totally puts women in the driver's seat. It helps them to feel safe, it helps them to feel private, and it allows them to contact who they want to contact. And if you're a guy, the system also recommends ways that you can improve your profile, because, the thing is, you can't look at other people's profiles, so you want to make your profile as good as it can get. So they do give you tips on, if you're a guy and you're using this, and how to make your profile better. Perway does have a commercial. It's kind of like a funny, tongue-in-cheek commercial, and it really embodies the philosophy of the design principles, so I thought I'd share it.
Hey, I hope you know CPR, because you just took my breath away.
No, I've done a lot of things right, but that was all wrong. Try it again.
Hey, I hope you know CPR, because you just took my breath away.
See, sometimes you just have to sit back, relax.
And let a woman take the lead. Herway.com, a better approach to dating.
So kind of a cheesy commercial, really summarizes the philosophy behind the product. So a few notes about gender. I like to end on this, and I'm going to sound like Captain Obvious with some of this stuff. But, you know, it's just some of the things it's easy to forget. Not all women are heterosexual. You know, Her Way does not, as far as I know, unless they changed it, it's not designed for women seeking women or men seeking men or anything like that. So it's easy to kind of leave some people behind. So, you know, we certainly don't want to forget, you know, people who are not heterosexual, people who have other sexual orientations and whatnot. That leads me to, not everyone falls into the gender binary. We've been talking a lot about men and women. And I just like to throw this out there because this is kind of obscure and not a very mainstream topic of discussion. But, you know, not everyone identifies as male or female. Some people identify as kind of like a blur of the two, or they identify outside of the binary altogether. There are all sorts of different, you know, identities that exist kind of between the two or outside of the two. And if you're designing, you know, this is a really common form, you know, element on form where, you know, I'm sure you guys have filled out plenty of these forms where it's asking you to identify, but if you don't identify as a man or a woman, how do you fill out this form? So I read an interesting article on BagCheck about a year or two ago. This was an interesting solution that they came up with, where it asks you for your preferred possessive pronoun, his, her, or their. So, you know, it's kind of it's an edge case. There aren't many people out there who don't fall into the gender binary, but they do exist. So it's important to kind of, you know, remember everybody. I know for a while there was actually a petition going around against Facebook because Facebook was not inclusive of people who were, you know, trans or of another gender. Facebook, you know, the only options were male and female. There was a petition going around. And Diaspora, which is a social network that's been in development for a couple of years, I don't know if it's ever going to launch. They also, one of their developers blogged about how they actually made gender an open field. So it was just an open text field, and you could type in whatever you wanted. You could type in male, female, man, woman, you know, whatever, trans, whatever. So there is some awareness of this now, even though it's a little, you know, again, it's not very mainstream. So that brings us to the end, and if I were to leave you with one message, I would say, again, I sound like Captain Obvious, but I just showed you many examples of why it's important to remember this. So don't stereotype your audience and instead take the time to understand them. I have some resources here. I will post my slides on slide deck, and I'll send them to Tristan if you wouldn't mind sending it out to anybody. So I'll update my slides so you guys can have access to the stuff. Because these resources were really helpful for me. There are more out there too, so if you are interested in more things, I can send you more things. And that's it. Thanks.